Welcome to a Rice University digital media production. For more information about us, please visit our website at www.rice.edu.
Good evening. I'm Bob Casey. I'd like to welcome you all to the third Books That Shaped My World speakers in our Books That Shaped My World series. We're here to welcome Dr. Robert Curl. For a man who has quite an illustrious career and reputation, I was given a very short piece of paper to give you a brief background. Dr. Curl came to Rice in 1950 from the Odessa, Texas area. He received his BA in 1954 and then enrolled in the PhD program at the University of California, Berkeley, where he studied under someone very well known to the Rice community, Dr. Kenneth Pitzer, who later became the university's third president. Dr. Curl returned to Rice in 1958 as an assistant professor. He has, throughout his career, exemplified all of the most praiseworthy features of the university: excellence in research and outstanding teaching and mentoring. Dr. Curl's 1985 discovery of the carbon-60, the buckyball, with collaborators Rick Smalley and Harry Croteau, laid the foundation for the opening of a new frontier in nanoscale science and nanotechnology. This discovery also led to a shared Nobel Prize in Chemistry, awarded in 1996. Despite his retirement, Dr. Curl continues his research today in physical chemistry as the Kenneth S. Pitzer Schlumberger Professor Emeritus of Natural Sciences and University Professor Emeritus. He is a devoted member of the community and has been since he set foot on the campus more than 60 years ago. And it doesn't even mention in here that I think you were master of Lovett College also. So you have to be truly dedicated to serve as master with your spouse there. So thank you very much. With that, please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Curl.
As always, the first order of business is to make sure that the microphone is working and everybody can hear me without me shouting. Is that true in the back? The second order of business is that those people who have stiff necks may want to move in this direction, because I'm going to show just a very few slides, so they may not be all that much interest, so you don't have to worry about it if you feel like it's much trouble. Now, this talk is going to be a very personal story. I've read the title of this series, which was Books That Shaped My World, and so I took it very literally and tried to think about the books that had actually shaped my life. Anytime you want to interrupt me, please feel free to do so. I'll be happy to answer questions or clarify anything. Later on, after I finish, we may want to start a discussion of other books. I might have read them, I might have not, but I'd just like to hear about them if you like them. Anyway, the main thing is just to enjoy. Now, I have to start out with respect to my reading with a confession. Probably somewhere between 90 and 95% of the reading I've done you would classify as junk. Mystery stories, adventure stories, things like that. And I started that way as a small child and on this evil path. You can't really talk about books that have shaped your life without getting kind of personal, so I'm going to have to tell you a little bit about me personally, and we'll go from there. My father was a Methodist minister from the time I was born until I was about maybe 10 years or 12 years old, something like that. We moved almost every year. And that was kind of dreadful because we always moved in October at that time, so that meant that school had started one place, and then I moved another place, and school had already started there. My parents were about 40 when I was born, and the only other sibling I have, my sister Mary, is almost 9 years older than I am. So I've always suspected I was a bit of a surprise to my parents. But of course, we never talked about stuff like that. So I don't know. My parents had a pretty traditional role-based marriage. You know, the wife stays home and cooks and takes care of the house, and the husband is supposed to go out and encounter the world. I'll show you a picture of my, whoops, I guess I want. There it is. That's my mother. Probably, she was about 50 then, and so she wasn't, in her early 50s, so she wasn't that old. Now, one peculiar thing about my parents is there was a little bit of role reversal in one aspect. My mother taught me how to ride a bicycle. She would go outside and play catch with me, and my father would read me books. So I apparently got my athletic mobility from my father. So anyway, we went from one small town to another. My father was pretty widely read and had a great deal of knowledge. You know, you never know when you're in a small town, in some small town in Texas, you know, how up with things people are. I mean, in fiction, there are a lot of people that are up with things. You know, you have Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird was obviously a very knowledgeable person and lived in a small town. But my father had a wide range of interests, and he had some unusual abilities. He would get up every morning and read part of the New Testament in Greek. He also claimed that he knew a little Hebrew, but apparently it was very little Hebrew because, as far as I know, he almost never tried to read the Old Testament in Hebrew. Anyway, as I said, he was the one who read to me. I ought to give you kind of a little feeling about the kind of milieu that my parents lived in. Anybody ever read Gilead, Marilyn Robinson's Gilead? So remember how sweet the preachers were towards each other and kind and so on. That's really true. This is the closest thing I ever saw to the way that the preachers in the Methodist Church treated each other in the 1930s and 1940s. So anyway, my father's reading played a really big part in my life, my whole career, because in 1943, he ordered and got this book. I had to borrow this from U of H library. I lost my copy long ago. This book is a treasury of science by Harlow Shapley. And he got the very first edition and read it to me over a period of months. And it's, of course, a book about science and all its aspects, from astronomy to mathematics, even to biology and psychology. And I found it just fascinating. I'll read a little bit out of Harlow Shapley's introduction or preface to the book. Perhaps the greatest satisfaction in reading of scientific exploits and participating with active imagination in the dull chores, the braced syntheses, the hard-won triumphs of scientific work lies in the realization that ours is not an unrepeatable experience. Tomorrow night we can again go out among the distant stars. Again we can drop cautiously below the ocean surface to observe the unbelievable forms that inhabit those salty regions of high pressure and dim illumination. Again we can assemble the myriad molecules with new combinations, weave them into magic carpets that take us into strange lands of beneficent drugs and new fabrics and utensils designed to enrich the process of everyday living. Again, we can be biologist, geographer, astronomer, engineer, and help the philosopher evaluate the nature and meaning of natural laws. I forgot to show you my father. That's him much, much older than that. It's probably around 70 in that picture. It was Christmas time. That's what you see to the side. And this is Harlow Shapley. He was a famous astronomer, a member of the National Academy, published many books. He had the unfortunate experience of being on the wrong side of a scientific debate, because in the 1920s he debated another astronomers about whether everything we could see was just our galaxy or if there were other galaxies. And of course, he was on the side of everything was just in our galaxy. But he later on, as all good scientists do, decided that he was wrong and actually published a book called Galaxies. So this book really profoundly changed my life, because I really became interested in science. About this time, I got a chemistry set, and I did everything in the chemistry set, mixed every possible combination of chemicals, and there were a few real chemicals in chemical sets in those days, not like now. And I wanted to continue with chemistry, so my next favorite book, where is it? It's called Fortunes and Formulas for Home, Farm, and Workshop. And it's still in print. You can get it from Amazon. I don't think you can get the edition that I had. But I have here somewhere. There's one review of Fortunes and Formulas in Amazon.com, one reader review. This book has a recipe for just about any kind of compound you could possibly want to make at home, from rust preventatives to cleaning preparations, beer, wine, and rare liqueurs such as absinthe. Also paints, craft glues, marbles, and cosmetics, even fireworks. Wonderful book. And especially the part about the fireworks. But that's saying not a whole lot about my reading. That's saying mostly about what was read to me and my how-to book about getting things for chemicals. There wasn't any TV when I was a child. There are not very many people that remember a world without any TV anymore. For kids, no TV is a wonderful thing, because it unleashes the power of boredom. Particularly in my case, since I was not athletic, kept moving all the time, had a few friends, but not all that many, I had lots of opportunity to be bored. And so one escape from boredom is to read. And of course, most of the stuff I read was junk. Comic books. One of my favorite real books was the Jerry Todd series by Leo Edwards. I doubt if anybody here has read any Jerry Todd. I don't see any enthusiasm for it. It's a great book for kids. I tried to read Tom Swift and didn't much care for Tom Swift, and the same is true even more for the Hardy Boys. I didn't really much care for them. I did read other things like a little Tarzan and some other kinds of adventure stories. The next really, so this was going on. We finally, when I was 13, we moved to Austin, and for the first time, my father had a real study, that he could line his study with books. And so when I was bored, I would go into his study and look to see what I could read. One of my discoveries was way up on the top shelf. There were all these books explaining the mysteries of sex. And since I was feeling the effects of hormones by the age 13, I found that a fascinating idea. And so anytime both my parents were out of the house, I would get up there and pick down the books and read about that. Another book that I read out of his collection, which really changed my life in a very strong way, is, I'll have to lead up to this with talking about myself and my personal outlook before I get into that. throughout my childhood and throughout my teen years, I was immersed in Methodism. You know, I went to church camps, and my parents even rented a cottage adjacent to the church camp for a couple of summers, and so I spent those summers virtually all the time in church camp. The problem is it didn't seem to stick. And why it didn't remains a mystery to me. I was surrounded by sweet, decent, dedicated people. They're really the cream of the world, you know. And they were all highly religious people. They walked the walk. But I just was not moved to join them in this. So where this book comes in is off of my father's shelf. I took down The Way of All Flesh. Has anybody read The Way of All Flesh? That's, you know, this, to me, this was just stunning. And I don't know why I felt that way. I'll read something that makes you see why I might feel that way. This is from the introduction for an edition in the U.S. in 1916 by a Yale University professor named Phelps. He says, the foundation, this is Samuel Butler, of course, that wrote The Way of All Flesh. I have a copy of it. It's called Ernest Pontifex here, but it used to be, it's actually Ernest Pontifex and The Way of All Flesh, but I think the original ones were just called The Way of All Flesh. Anyway, the foundation of Butler's styles is the paradox. Moral dynamics are reversed. The unpardonable sin is conventionality. His masterpiece answers no questions, solves no problems, chases away no perplexities. Every reader becomes an interrogation point. Butler rubs our thoughts the wrong way. And as axiom after axiom is ruthlessly attacked, we pick over our minds for some missile to throw at him. It is a good thing for every man and woman whose brain happens to be in activity to read this amazingly clever, original, brilliant, diabolical novel. And for those whose brains are in captivity, it may smash some fetters. Everyone who understands what he reads will take an inventory of his own religious and moral stock. And that seemed a little extravagant because I did reread the book recently and was sort of strange. What the Way of All Flesh is about is the father from hell, two fathers from hell, but the father of the protagonist is named Theobald Pontifex, and the protagonist is Ernest Pontifex. And this book is apparently largely autobiographical. Anyway, this father was absolutely controlling, severely punishing, left no freedom to his kid at all, and that really wasn't my situation. You know, compared to Theobald Pontifex, my father and mother both were just pussycats. You know, they were just, there was no possible reason to want to rebel against them. But somehow this book galvanized me, I guess because it was the first real strong reinforcement of my sort of skeptical ways. Anyway, it has played a big role in my life. So, there are many books that I've read. You may not really think that these are exactly great books. I mean, I bet none of you had heard of Fortunes and Formulas. Probably none of you had heard of A Treasury of Science. So obviously some people have read The Way of All Flesh. By the way, I did look, one likes to think about, have I read any great books? You know, there are these lists of 50 or 100 great books that everyone should have read, and they're not ever quite consistent. And the answer is the only great books I've really read, almost until very recently, were books that I had either had in the Great Books course by McKillop. Is there anybody here that remembers McKillop? Sam, you remember McKillop? You remember McKillop. And the other ones were in the Survey of Philosophy that Sanoff had, which those were most of my stock of great books. Now, I will have to say that The Way of All Flesh was number 12 on the Modern Library ranking of the 100 best English novels of the 20th century. But other than that, there were very little outside of required reading that I'm afraid I had done. So after I retired, I felt like maybe my education was incomplete. Okay, and so I think the last couple of years I've tried to tackle some of the ones I had mixed. Okay, and the ones that you really have tried before and it didn't work for you too well are Remembrance of Things Past and Ulysses. And so, by the way, in my old age, I have gotten in a really bad habit of not finishing books, so it's not surprising that I wouldn't finish. But I was reading Ulysses, and I was going along pretty well. Ulysses is really a breakthrough novel in the sense that it's the first novel that I've ever seen before where you followed somebody through a typical day and you were hearing the thoughts, often obscene, mostly trivial, that was running through these people's minds, essentially as a stream of consciousness book. And it was a big breakthrough there. The trouble is that I reached a point where Joyce decided he would go in for wordplay. He just listed a whole bunch of one word after another with no obvious connection between them. And I don't know, this seemed to come out of nowhere. I couldn't figure out what this was. So I got about 50 words into this, and I said, okay, Joyce, you've lost me now. I may come back and skip through that part and go on, but it really was a deal breaker as far as I was concerned. So I started reading Swann's Way, okay? And I was enjoying reading Swann's Way. It's a very quiet book that is really about memory and what strikes one as a child and a lot about the aesthetics of things. It's going really great, okay? But then, all of a sudden, Proust starts talking about his theories of aesthetics. You know, the narration is broken off. This is his theories of aesthetics. And after about a page of that, I said, all right, Marcel, no more for you. So what I really wish had happened is that before those books were published, that Maxwell Perkins had a hand in going through them. You know, Maxwell Perkins was the guy who edited books for Hemingway and Thomas. Yeah, his main thing was cutting Thomas Wolfe's novels down to 1,000 pages or so. Because there was no reason that I could think of why you would break the tone of what you were doing sort of arbitrarily. I think in the case of Joyce, there may just have been a day when he had complete writer's block and he just decided he'd write all the words that he knew. But anyway, there may be people here who can defend these folk. But I have tried some other things that worked out fairly well. I've fairly recently read Herodotus History, which is mostly about the Persian Wars. And that's a really pleasant book to read. And I've read a lot. It's hard to find a person who's read all of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon. There may be somebody in the room. Has anybody in the room read all of The Decline and Fall? I don't think so. I mean, you know, I'm very proud of myself. I got up to about 800 AD, you know, which was well after Rome had fallen, and it was off talking about the barbarians that had taken over Europe and the effects of the invasion of the Normans. That was later, but he didn't exactly fall in chronology. Okay, so anyway, I can recommend those, and maybe somebody can show me the virtues of the best novel ever written, which is Ulysses. Now we come to the next issue is advice books. Let's see if I have an advice book here. This is it. This is a book called The Mirages of Marriage. Anyone ever hear of The Mirages of Marriage? You see, this is I go in for sort of obscure things, trying to tell you about some of the things you haven't read. Well, the nice thing about this book is that everything in it can be summed up in 2 very powerful and important sentences. So you don't have to buy the book. I should show you a couple of other things. I get carried away. There's Samuel Butler in his old age. He spent a lot of time in New Zealand. Oh, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. So, anyway, what are the 2 sentences? Well, I will state them for the 1 or 2 mathematicians in the audience, because they're the folks that really need it. So, first sentence, marriage is a 2-person game where both players win or both players lose. Second sentence, therefore the winning strategy is to play so your spouse wins. This is actually a 3rd sentence that's a corollary to that. Since your spouse can only win if you win too, you have to help your spouse see that. Okay, so that's one book of useful knowledge. Now, I think this book is checked out, or I forgot, it's usually checked out. This is a book about cancer. Maybe some of you, this is a new book. Maybe somebody of you read it. It's called The Emperor of All Maladies. So there's just one person reading. That's a great book on cancer. It's really the history of the cancer, of cancer and its treatment up to the present day, with lots of practical and rather poignant examples. Anyway, I highly recommend that book. Another book that I highly recommend, which I don't know if I ever got it to the top. Where is it? So I've got out of order here. Maybe it's this over here. No, that's not it. Anyway, I will dig it out. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And this is a practically brand new book, and it's really about what's actually going on in your head when you think you're thinking. And the interesting thing about it is this title, Thinking Fast and Slow, is in exactly about the same subject as the title, not the book, but the title, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Zen is fast and motorcycle maintenance is slow. So, but there are many more, in both of those books, there are many, many more things than those 2 comments, but they happen to coincide on the title. Okay, so as you might imagine, science books have played a large role in my life. And so even among science books, I have my favorite science books. And again, I'm out of order. One of them, my favorite of all, is Quantum Mechanics by Dirac. This is the most explains in the most elegant mathematical language the foundations of non-relativistic, mostly non-relativistic quantum mechanics. It's another book that I haven't finished, but that's what that seems to say about me is I'm not a scholar. I can abandon a book, I pick up a book and get what I'm interested in out of it, and sometimes, particularly if it's technical, and drop it. Another book along those lines, which I found very useful, is called The Theory of Group Characters and Matrix Representations of Groups by Douglas Ernest Littlewood, who was a contemporary of George Hardy. If you know Hardy at Oxford, he was at Oxford, and so was Hardy. Anyway, this book, just told me what I needed to know about group theory in very difficult language, I must say. And of course, and when I got what I wanted out of the book and things got messy, I abandoned it. So another book I've never finished. Now, so there are a couple of books that I have finished, just to give you a little variation. And these are books for the mathematically inclined layman, if you happen to find yourself in this category. John Derbyshire writes these books. One of them, the first one I read, is called Prime Obsession. And this is concerned with Riemann's hypothesis about the nature of the zeta function, which is a description of the distribution of the prime numbers, the exact distribution of the prime numbers. And this has not been solved. And what's really interesting about it is that you have to find the roots, in order to understand what's going on, you have to find the roots of a transcendental equation. And the mathematicians have found 225 million roots, but they're not happy. So Riemann's hypothesis remains a hypothesis. Unknown Quantity is a different kind of book. It describes the history of algebra, and I'll come back to it in a minute because it's something else I want to tell you about. I kind of want to finish by talking about what science is about. The dedication to the scientific enterprise was planted in me at age 10 by a treasury of science. And so it's grown to be a very large part of my life. And if you're not part of this enterprise, I think it's pretty hard you have a hard time understanding this obsession with science. And so I'd like to read you a couple of things that might help. I may start by, I'll let you look at this picture. That's a picture of G.N. Lewis. You know Ted Lewis, some of you do. He's retired from the chemistry department. He's about 90 now. Ted Lewis was his son. G.N. Lewis was a famous chemist of the first part of the 20th century. And he wrote a book which I purchased at the Rice bookstore for $6.65 new. So you know how old it is. And also the roaches have gotten at it. But I'll just read you a little bit, maybe. There are ancient cathedrals which, apart from their consecrated purpose, inspire solemnity and awe. Even the curious visitor speaks of serious things with hushed voice, and as each whisper reverberates through the vaulted nave, the returning echo seems to bear a message of mystery. You can see how old this was. If you've been to a cathedral in Europe anytime recently, it's not like that. But it used to be. The labor of generations of architects and artisans has been forgotten. The scaffolding erected for their toil has long since been removed. Their mistakes have been erased or have become hidden by the dust of centuries. Seeing only the perfection of the completed whole, we are impressed as by some superhuman agency. But sometimes we enter such an edifice that is still partly under construction. Then the sound of hammers, the reek of tobacco, the trivial jest bandied from workman to workman enable us to realize that these great structures are but the result of giving ordinary human effort a direction and a purpose. So that's what the scientific enterprise is about. Now I have one other thing. That's not it. I have to move some of these things out of the way. Here it is. Okay. The other thing along the lines of science goes like this, okay? Anybody know who that woman is? Have any idea who that woman is? I'll give you her name. You know it, huh? Good. She is a remarkable individual. She was a giant of mathematics. Probably almost certainly the best female mathematician the world has ever seen. She was born in 1882 in Germany, in Erlangen. Her father was a math professor. He's known in this book as Nurter the Lesser. At that time, if you're a woman in Germany, the phrase was Kinder, Kirche, Küche, children, church, kitchen. It was almost impossible to get a PhD, particularly in mathematics, in Germany at that time. She got a PhD, finally. Then the problem was she wanted to be a mathematics professor, and to be a mathematics professor in Germany, you have to have habilitation to be able to take on students. And she couldn't get a habilitation. So David Hilbert was impressed by her and invited her to come to Göttingen and sort of took care of her. She essentially, he would let her give his lectures for him. It was one of the things she did, sort of a Tom Sawyer kind of thing, actually. Eventually, in the early 1920s, she got a habilitation. And by the late 20s, she finally had a salary. She didn't have a salary until then. And she had a group of keen students around her that were called Nurter's boys. And so everything was going along well. And then Hitler came to power. And in addition to being a woman, she was a Jew. So she fled to the United States and got a position at Bryn Mawr and died shortly thereafter, apparently of a botched operation. Anyway, I wanted to read part of an obituary that Einstein wrote to her. Maybe a little water would help. For the New York Times. Now, Einstein did have reason to be grateful to her because she proved a theorem that made the development of the general theory of relativity possible. That's not what she's most famous for. She's most famous for putting the theory of algebra on a firm foundation. So I'll read it. In the realm of, this is Einstein, in the realm of algebra, which the most gifted mathematicians have studied for centuries, she discovered methods of enormous importance. There is, fortunately, a minority composed of those who recognize early in their lives that the most beautiful and satisfying experiences open to humankind are not derived from the outside, but are bound up with the development of the individual's own feeling, thinking, and acting. The genuine artists, investigators, and thinkers have always been persons of this kind. However inconspicuously the life of these individuals runs its course, nonetheless, the fruits of their endeavors are the most valuable contributions which one generation can make to its successors. So, that concludes. I will show you. I haven't gotten over my interest in comics, so I will show you. I hope I will. A comic. This has one sentence that I found extremely profound. I don't know if you can read it. I'll try to read it. It says, "Aloha, old buddy. You ever wonder how all this came to be? You don't believe in God, Opus? I'm a penguin. We're not sure what we believe in. Except purpose, we believe in having purpose, and also lots of squid." That's ridiculous. If you think this is all just a cosmic accident, you're left purposeless. I'm not purposeless. Yeah, well, if we're really all merely atoms bumping around by chance, there's little hope for finding meaning in life. Gone. Opus, life's meaning. Maybe it's not so much found as it is made. So anyway, that concludes my talk, and let's be happy to continue discussing books or anything you want.
Does anybody have any questions? Mary?
Dr. Carl, do you read online hard copy books?
No, that's the planted question. We'll get that out of the way. I read a lot of books on my iPod Touch. And this is a great picture of a Touch, and there are 8 different book reading things there. One of which, of course, is defunct because Barter's Books is no more. But obviously the Kindle, Amazon Kindle, the Nook is Barnes & Noble. Google Books has some of their many books available. They've never sold a lawsuit, so they've never been able to sell all those books that they copied. Overdrive is the Houston area digital library thing. They don't have a lot of books, and they don't have any money to buy more books, but there are some interesting things, and you can download them there. Kobo is another store that you can buy books online. iBooks is the iBook store, and Stanza has links to free books. So you can understand that you can get from EPUB books from the Open Library and from Project Gutenberg. So these are books that are out of copyright that have been digitized. Anyway, that's I enjoy very much reading out of a Kindle, and I suspect this planted question was the concern whether many people, or whether people like to read out of electronic books or not. I do. If you go on a long plane flight, that's the only way you can take enough books without burdening yourself. And I really like reading off the touch, strangely enough, because it's light. Anyway, I guess this was a commercial. I don't know for whom. Apple, maybe. Okay.
I have a question, Bob. Since your father was a Methodist minister, and he read to you a lot, did he also read to you from the Bible? Just curious.
I don't recall he ever read for me from the Bible. Not except in church. I mean, I go to Sunday school, and I had a kid's Bible, right? And we had our readings for Sunday school and that sort of stuff. But my father was not. It's sort of. My father was completely the opposite of Theobald Pontifex, because he really wanted me to follow what I wanted. And he could see the direction I was going, and gave him a little concern, but he never tried to push me in any other direction.
For our children and grandchildren, we're not going to be able to duplicate the Methodist minister dad or the chemistry set that you had, or the experience of reading those books at that time, but what would you recommend?
Well, I don't know, turn off the TV. I mean, if you have books around that are, particularly books that are kids would find interesting, and they don't have anything else to do, they'll usually break down and read, or some of them will. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I mostly read junk. I don't do a lot of serious reading. The mystery stories, and I'm kind of I'm sort of bothered by even fictional blood. And so, I read the Game of Thrones all the way through, and I thought, this is not doing my mental health any good. I started to read what is A Storm of Swords, and said, no, I guess maybe I'll at least put this off for a long time.
There's a lot of talk in business and science today about the importance of collaboration and people working together and the spark of creativity. Can you comment through the course of your career, even all the way from your childhood, you talked about sort of the collaboration with your father, but then as growing up, how does collaboration work through the course of your career?
Well, science is intensely collaborative, intensely social situation. I think that the Frankenstein movies did science a great disservice, because it created the image of the science with his laboratory on the top of the mountain so he'd be close to the thunderstorms to activate the monster. And he was there by himself, and he just had his faithful servant Igor as the only company he had. And that's so completely opposite from what science is. It's a complete social network. So you have your collaborators, you have your friends, you have your enemy friends, you have. It's just a. You're always trying to bring things together, and you're working with other people that may have ideas. So you want an example, Well, of course, the carbon-60 story is a wonderful example of something that came out of little, because the essence of the carbon-60 story was the creation of the machine that Smalley built. And that's for studying clusters. And that's what made everything else possible. The getting together, Smalley always had the idea that if I build this machine and explore things, something wonderful may come out of it. And of course, the wonderful things about wonderful things is they never come out of where you expect them to, usually. And so the way this is a collaboration is that Harry came to visit me. He wanted to do an experiment, which was really about the chemistry of the interstellar medium. Rick didn't want to do this experiment. I wasn't too enthusiastic originally. But then I remembered, or Harry mentioned, I don't remember how this came up, there was a brief letter by Alec Douglas, who was a physicist who's long dead, who at the National Research Council in Ottawa, proposing that the diffuse interstellar bands were caused by absorption by small carbon clusters, few carbon atoms, 5, 6, 7, 8, something like that. And that sort of rings a bell because I'm afraid my actual weakness as a scientist is I'm a puzzle solver, I don't feel that terribly creative. And so the diffuse interstellar bands were first observed in 1919. And no one, certainly in 1985, knew what caused them. This thing that Douglas had written was in about 1971 or something like that. But Rick's machine, you could test this. On Rick's machine, you could actually see whether these things were the carriers of the diffuse interstellar band. So it was an opening. And so I had the notion myself that if we did Harry's experiment, this would be a good first step to trying to do this business on the diffuse interstellar bands. Because I wasn't particularly interested in Harry's experiment either. So anyway, Harry came, and of course, what happened was, yes, what he wanted to do worked. C60 just fell out of the experiments without anybody really trying that hard. And I forgot all about the diffuse interstellar bands. I have to report to you that there is a guy in Basel, John Mayer, who spent the last 20 years of his life or so following up on what Alec Douglas had proposed. And not this last summer, but the summer before last, summer of 2010, he reported that he had found the first clear source, a clear proof of the origin of one of the diffuse interstellar bands, and it was a long chain carbon cluster. So, there's a big difference. A week to carbon-60 or 2 weeks to carbon-60 and 20 years out of your life. Different kinds of science.
Dr. Cole, and can we this presentation to the Chemical Heritage Foundation by chance?
No, not this.
It would be nice to have that recorded.
Well, I guess it's been recorded. Doug has been doing something up there. So I guess it's been recorded. Any other questions?
Let's take two more questions, and then we've got an opportunity for some beverages and a little light refreshment outside, and people can have further discussions at that point.
As far as discussing the process of science, one of the famous books is Jim Watson's The Double Helix. Can you comment on what kind of impact that made on you personally?
Well, I wasn't interested in that area at the time, so it actually had not made a big impact on me. It's an interesting story. If Rosalind Franklin had lived, what would the Nobel Foundation have done? That's the most interesting story because it's restricted to 3 people. It's obviously the double helix is a tremendous breakthrough for biology. I've gotten a lot more interested in biology than I used to be. But at the time, I knew there was a race to get the crystal structure. Actually, Linus Pauling's son was trying to unravel the crystal structure at the same time and failed, I guess. Lost the race is a more accurate description.
You gave a really good talk to Scientia about the challenges to humanity. I think the series on human resourcefulness and vulnerability, do we have what it takes to survive? And after you finished that talk, I mentioned there were some real parallels with the UK astronomer Royal Martin Reed in his book, Our Final Hour. I don't know if you ever read it, but do you have any books that you think are insightful about the human challenges?
We have to talk about time horizons. No, the short answer is no. Okay, the problem is that humanity is doomed. Okay, so it's just a question of when, not if, and we'll never be able to at least I don't think we will ever be able to go someplace else if our solar system proves uninhabitable, and it's likely to at some point or another, because our sun is going to become a red giant. But then there's the next time scale. If a big asteroid comes our way, can we do anything about it? And I guess that depends on how much preparation time there is. But we always have the problem that what is your time horizon? Is it my lifetime? Is it my kid's lifetime? Is it my grandchildren's lifetime? How far does it go? And the immediate challenges, of course, are probably going to be global warming, but that's not going to be fatal to humanity. Just possibly unpleasant. But I don't know of any good books about the challenges. The problem really about the challenges is that it's hard to figure out exactly how the solutions are going to work out. Bob Brito and I have worked on this a long time, and the main obstruction I see to solar energy right now, it's economics. In the future, it's going to be we don't know how to store electricity. So what are we going to do when the sun goes down? You can use wind turbines. They do something at night, but their operation is somewhat irregular. So actually sorting through the problems and trying to figure out which ones are going to be the ones that are the real game killers is, I think, the hard part. You know, how are we going to make solar power work? It really makes operation of the grid a mess. How are we going to replace liquid fossil fuels? That's a big problem. So it's awfully hard to run jet engines on electricity. So.
These three mysteries that we all should read.
Great mysteries we should all read. Jonelle, this is your forte. What's a really good mystery? I've been really fond of The Beekeeper's Apprentice. Have you read that? We recently read a lot of the Peter Robinson books about this English professor, this detective inspector, Alan Banks. But I finally couldn't read the last one because poor Alan had been beaten up so much my life that I didn't want to stand it anymore. Jonelle has read it.
And a brief thank you, she stepped out, but to Mary Bixby and the Friends of Fondren who did the work to organize all of this. So thanks to Mary who's outside. If you'll please come out and join us, we have refreshments outside and continue the conversation there. Thank you.
This program is protected by copyright and may not be redistributed in whole or in part without the express written consent of Rice University Digital Media Services.